coming today. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with you. And I'm not supposed to talk or sell the business Seesy, so of course I won't be doing that. I'm going to try and add a little bit of value to what's happening. So today we're talking about why, or it's more about why I should work for you is the title. And what do I mean by this? It's really about that struggle to find talent, and it's about looking to innovate the process of how that talent search is done. So a little intro for me first of all. So I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Seesy. I have built and owned several recruitment businesses in financial services, technology, and in construction. I hire staff now in a number of my companies. We own a group of companies. And now I've built some recruitment technology. So hopefully I can add some value by sharing with you my insight, my lived experience, actually of being on all sides of the fence when in that hiring process. So, as I said, what do I mean by this? There is a real struggle to find talent. I mean, most companies today are struggling or have struggled to find good quality and suitable talent. Some companies have lost talent over the last year or two, and companies can and should be innovating what and where they market job vacancies, which would lead to stronger, more suitable candidates, and ultimately those who are more interested in your specific role. This ultimately should be the goal for any talent acquisition team. So, does anyone know what this TV show is? I know my wife does, who's here, because she makes me watch it all the time. Couple of nods, couple of yeses. So this is a TV show called Married at First Sight, and you're probably thinking, what the hell has this got to do with recruitment and talent acquisition? Hopefully, the theme that I've put together will tie those things together. If it doesn't, then I apologize. So, 71 couples have been matched and married over the last 6 series, and only 5 of them remain. Although I did read in some press recently, as it says there, that it's actually down to 0. So don't quote me on that. So the best case, that's just 7% success rate. And I wondered why that was. It's really interesting because we've got these experts, including Paul Brunson. Now, Paul Brunson is, in fact, the world's, or quoted as the world's leading matchmaker. And along with Paul and other relationship experts, there are a team of psychologists and psychiatrists and psychoanalysts, and a number of behavioral experts that are given the task of matching these individuals together. All their expertise combined culminates in a decision that 2 individuals are perfectly matched for each other, or at least on paper. So why did this almost entirely fail, or why is it almost entirely failing? And here's my view on that. So humans are emotional beings, and they require visceral connection, or a visceral connection, which can, in this sense, can be referred to as chemistry. Now, there's absolutely no way of ascertaining whether a visceral connection or the chemistry exists between 2 humans simply by matching information or statistics on paper. And without this chemistry, that relationship just does not work. Not even if one side is 100% committed, one side feels the chemistry, and one side is 100% certain this is the right individual for them. Unless both sides agree on that, it just isn't going to work. So that's enough about romantic relationships, because that's not what you're here to learn. Let me start to try to tie this in to talent and recruiting. So what does this have to do with talent and recruiting? So today, for me, it has everything to do with talent and recruiting. I hear a lot in the industry, I don't know if you guys have come across the same thing, that today it's a candidate-driven market. It's the candidates who are holding companies to ransom is some of the kind of extreme narratives that I hear, because they have the power and they have the control. Now, I don't fully agree with that, actually. I can see why many people will feel that way and will believe that. But I think it's a bit of a conclusion that people are jumping to and perhaps assuming it for the wrong reason. So is there any truth in that? If there is, it's relatively short-lived. And I feel very strongly that there is a risk that businesses aren't being accountable actually to adapt to how to attract today's talent in today's market. It may not be the candidates are actually being greedy. It may just be that we're presenting these opportunities either to the wrong people or in the wrong way, and perhaps to both. So when we're looking at today's generation, let me take a couple of steps back to, in fact, I want to use today's talent rather than today's generation. Let me take a couple of steps back in terms of generations. So my parents' generation, this was kind of the mandate when it comes to finding a job. Find a job which pays the bills and you stay in that job for life. That's like, that's pretty much it. I mean, surely, very few people grew up dreaming of working in a factory or a mine or an industrial plant. That wasn't, necessarily the life goal, but it was just a consequence of that was the mandate. When we move that on to my generation, and let me use myself as an example, there was a slight extension to that. So for me, it was finding a job. I quite like sales, so I think I'd like to work in sales. That was something that I wanted to sort of focus in. And the important stuff for me was, how much are you going to pay me? Do I get a company car? That sounds perfect. I'll take it. It didn't really matter what product I was selling, at least in my early stage of my business. I was driven by other stuff. So I was slightly more specific than the previous generation, but not entirely the same as today. So I've just put here, it's kind of fair to say that my generation, I feel, or at least with me, it was primarily money, title, kind of success-driven decisions that decided on where that talent went. So when we're looking at today's talent, now I've only got 20 minutes, so I'm not sure that I can go through the list that we often receive from what today's talent ask for or are looking for when it comes to what's important to them in a job. You can see I'm not a very good comedian, so I won't bother doing any more jokes. I didn't really get a giggle out of that one. Here's some of the stuff which, again, through all of my experience in the different sides of the fence that I've been in within recruiting the recruitment process, that I can tell you, and you may well have come across, that is important to today's talent when they look to decide where they're going to work next, or in fact whether they're going to stay in the employment that they're in. What are the company values? What's their sustainability policy? How do they view mental health in the workplace? Is support offered for mental health? What's the working environment? Hybrid, remote, so on and so forth. What makes me happy? How can I make a difference to the company, and perhaps even bigger than that? Am I valued? Is the company in line with my values? Are the people in line with my values? What are the benefits? And so on and so forth. So you'll notice that all of these that I've spoken about here are all on a visceral and an emotional level. This starts to give you a picture of the drivers behind today's talent and their decision making when it comes to where they work, who they work for, and if they're happy in that workplace. So if these points don't match or they don't resonate with that particular individual, statistically, they will not take that job. Or if they do take the job, then they're unlikely to stay in that role for a long time. What we've seen with today's talent is they're very much happy to walk away from a role and be unemployed. That's less scary than being in a misaligned a business or a misaligned workplace that contravenes their values or their beliefs. So I'd argue that hiring the wrong candidates actually is probably worse than struggling to hire or not being able to fill a vacancy. It's often more painful for both sides and it can be more expensive. So what we've seen is that today's talent as I said, would rather not work at all than be unhappy, in my view. And ultimately, for much of today's talent, a job is way more than just that title or that business card or that paycheck. The values are different. The reasons why somebody would choose to work for a business or take a role is very different. Again, when we look at that list of 10 or 11 things, you'll see that there's no real mention there of money. It certainly still is a factor, I've no doubt, but the prominence of where that factor sits, I believe, is moving lower and lower down the list. So in summary, my generation seems to be driven more so by pay, business cards, job title, and that kind of stuff. Whereas today, it's more driven towards happiness and fulfillment, in my view, from what we're seeing in today's talent. So let's have a little look now at the process of how talent is sourced currently, and how that may look to improve or evolve in the future. So traditionally, the process of talent acquisition is very one-sided. It's often driven by the employer, and it's for the employer, for them to decide whether that candidate is potentially suitable to be considered for that role. That's the dynamic of it. Send me your CV, provide me with a covering letter, follow the link perhaps and complete a psychometric test or NLP or something else. Many of businesses have those kind of tests. Have a phone interview, maybe now a Zoom, and that's predominantly going to be you answering the questions or the candidate being asked the questions from the employer, again to ascertain their suitability and whether they're right for the role. Moving to potentially a face-to-face interview, maybe a second Zoom, where they may face yet more questions, maybe from another individual in that team. If you're lucky, here's another gag, I'm not sure you'll laugh, you may get a quick peek at the toilets in the reception area. That's pretty much, I know it's an extreme case, what many candidates will walk away from that process feeling at that stage, if that was the experience for them to go to. So let's ask ourselves, in that scenario, if that scenario were to be real life and true to form, what has the candidate really got from that experience? How can they gain that genuine human insight that they seek today? And importantly, on what basis can they create any of that visceral interest or that visceral connection that talent today require to make an informed decision for them to commit themselves to work within a role? So very little, is the answer. I do appreciate, like I say, it's an extreme example here, but what I can tell you from talking to thousands of candidates, although it may not always be seen as one-sided and as extreme as that for them as an experience, I can tell you that is often the interpretation, the feeling and the experience that they get. And that absolutely exists with many businesses in the UK today. Again, if we were to look at that list of 10 or 11 points, how many of those points would be answered in that process? I mean, for me, it's very little, if at all. So, what's the solution? Innovate and evolve how, what, and where you advertise your vacancies. Also, make sure that you're tailoring those vacancies to suit the particular audience that you're trying to communicate with, because there's a breadth of audiences, and therefore the messaging and the type of messaging, in my view, should be often entirely different, and sometimes slightly different. My tips when advertising your vacancies. So think about who the audience is the first and most important part of it. Where do they spend their time? Meaning whether they are in work or whether out of work, at weekends. Where are they spending their time? And obviously I'm starting to talk here more towards multimedia than physically, but maybe you look at physically too. And also, how do they consume media? So depending on the type of candidate that you're looking at, what is the way that they are being used or being able now to consume media, because many industries have already moved ahead of the hiring space, in my view, and they are allowing people to consume media or content in different ways, and often multi-level. I've just read that, so I won't stay on that one anymore. So look to use multimedia. You can show layers of what makes the company and the opportunity great and unique, or at least different. In short, be prepared to do a little bit more selling to be able to attract those interested buyers, if I use the term buyers, because ultimately this is a value proposition today. That's what's required. It's not one-sided transaction. It's actually now a coming together of two interested parties that need to have that mutual interest in each other. So just be prepared to do a little bit more selling and a little bit more varied in your process. Little statistic, interesting. You may well have come across this. There's 1.3 as of last data a couple of days ago. 1.3 million unfulfilled vacancies in the UK, which is pretty staggering. If you look at whatever roles that you guys have within your businesses, and I'm sure there's a mix of companies, industries, roles that you're looking for, volume of roles, and challenges that you may be having within the hiring processes currently, often you'll be competing with hundreds or probably thousands of other virtually identical looking roles within that 1.3 million. So what makes yours different or better? Because it is different. It's very different to the others. It's totally unique, actually, but the way that we tend to advertise these roles is boilerplate and pretty much the same kind of advertisement in the same kind of places. The answer is find a way that allows you to advertise your role in a way that it can resonate with the right individuals and form that chemistry and form that visceral insight for them to be able to then come to you and look to apply for a role genuinely interested in your business, genuinely interested in your role, because that's what's required today. I did a search yesterday on a very prominent job board. I won't mention it because it's a competitor of ours. And I searched for business development manager in the UK, paying £40,000 to £50,000 base, and they had to be live jobs that are actively available right now, just on one job board. And we know there's lots of job boards. There were 11,705 active jobs within that, within that particular section. So how do those businesses in that environment expect really good quality candidates? And I say good quality by not necessarily on a scorecard of them as candidates, but actually by the level of interest and suitability that they have for that particular role, because that's what is efficient recruitment. You want to receive less applications from more interested, better suited individuals. So 11,705 jobs was, I felt was a pretty staggering role. So I'm going to try a little exercise now to start to bring it home in terms of my theme and how you can look to improve your hiring or your vacancy application, your vacancy advertisement process, and hopefully start to attract better suited, more interested applicants. The best ever burger/Virger for those that are vegetarians. I don't want to offend anybody today. So here's two options. When I talk to clients about this stuff, typically, I normally use one of two examples. One involves food, one involves property. I've gone with food today, and hopefully it kind of circles home the point that I'm trying to make with you. So this first example is raw data, very matter of fact. Very matter of fact. So we've got word or text that's absorbed in a different part of the brain to multimedia. So, bun, tomato, beef patty, or vegetarian version, lettuce, and mustard. So that's my option one. That's my first advert to you. There's supposed to
Our
be some
chefs
sound.
at
I'm not sure if
M&S
there is because I
have
can't
spent
hear
a
it.
year obsessively developing our best ever burger. Crafted from specially selected cuts of British beef and a hint of bone marrow for that extra special flavour. We call this masterpiece our best ever burger, because it is.
Hopefully it doesn't keep playing on a loop. Good. So bit of a trick point there. The idea of both of these ultimately is to sell you or open your interest to that burger. One is matter of fact. One is a la most job adverts that we see today across a number of different job boards or direct hiring pages within businesses, and one uses a visceral, experienced multimedia, words, pictures and moving images, and that actually penetrates a different part of the brain. Without getting too scientific to it, I would like to think and assume that you received a different feeling and an emotion from watching that video of food than you did from just reading those basic words of that food. So in conclusion, excellent. It says here no notes, and there definitely were some notes, so I've got to try and make this next part up as I go. So in conclusion, multimedia is incredibly important when it comes to the hiring process and the early stage advertising process with today's talent in today's market. There's so much that we can do with multimedia. It's so accessible. It really does give you the opportunity to attract amazing candidates, and by allowing them to see, hear and feel the company, the values, the culture, the people, really allows for that visceral interest and attraction to happen, which is the way that we're seeing with our business. Companies able to really improve the efficiency of their recruitment and the success of their recruitment by advertising that role in a different way. So, the two most important questions to ask. Two most important questions to ask yourself when planning your next hire is this: how do they consume media? Where do they spend their time? If you can start to understand your audience with these two questions asked, you will find and you will be able to find interesting ways to start to advertise that role in a different way to the right kind of audience in the space where they're spending your time. And in my view, that will allow your hiring process to be more successful and more efficient. And that's it from me.